Have you ever played a game and there was a certain mechanic or two that really just got on your nerves, or that you really thought really shouldn't have been there in the first place, and if it was removed or changed, could have made the experience a little better? Well, Yu-Gi-Oh has a couple of those, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 5 worst Yu-Gi-Oh mechanics of all time. Now, go ahead and preface this ahead of time. Obviously, this is my opinion. Drop down your own in the comment section below if you have a different list from mine. I'm including everything from little rule things here and there to entire summoning mechanics. So without further ado, I won't waste any more time. Let's get right into number 5. Number 5, we're going to have our first summoning mechanic, and that's going to be link summoning. Now, I want to preface this one by saying that I actually like the mechanic pretty well myself. And in fact, I mean, this is coming from a guy whose favorite deck of all time is Salamangreat, an entirely link focused deck, except for like Mirage Stalio being your XE, but whatever. For the most part, it's all links, right? But I don't think necessarily that link summoning is bad in and of itself. I think inherently the actual mechanic is fine. I think it's actually a decent summoning mechanic. My problem was that what it turned into and the kind of cards that they were printing for it really bring it down, and I think were overall detrimental to the game. Now, what do I mean by detrimental? It kind of gets into that idea of generic boss monsters, and I'm not really a huge person who has a lot of issues with generic boss monsters. They've been kind of a part of the game since forever, but I do think links are a special case where, unlike a Baron, for instance, or a Zeus, right, where both of those are very specific. You have to have an XE or you have to have a synchro package to be able to play those two cards. Links are, for a lot of them, pretty easy to summon and can be plugged into a lot of decks. Like, sure, you can plug a Baron into a ton of different synchro strategies, but that's where it's going to stay for the most part, is synchro strategies. Zeus can kind of go into a couple more different places because of the way that it is. At the end of the day, it's still going to be in a XE focused strategy, or at least a strategy that can easily make XEs, and not every deck can do that. Not every deck can make easily a synchro or an XE monster. But with links, a lot of them are so generic that you really can. I mean, we're seeing it right now with the power of it. Back in the day, it was IP Masquerena, now SP Little Knight, Access Code, all these different monsters that are so powerful that don't require that hard of a summoning condition. Maybe they just need effect monsters, period, to work. They don't need archetype specific monsters. They don't need link specific monsters. They don't need like Cybers monsters or anything like that. A lot of them are just effect monsters, and that makes them very generic, very good, and also very prevalent. If you just look at the ban list, I think it's evident also right there that like there's a lot of blue on that list, and a large part of it is because not even necessarily that links themselves as mechanics are bad, but Konami kept making them easier to summon, and they also kept making them more powerful and easier to break. And I think that's really where link summoning comes here at number 5 on my list, because at the end of the day, I think if you take link summoning out of Yu-Gi-Oh and replace it with something a little more toned down, maybe it's not as crazy as it is. I'm not sure about that 100%, but that's why it's number 5 and not number 1. Next one is going to be one that's a lot more personal to me, and that is going to be unrespondable activations. We're talking about cards like, the biggest case scenario here is super polymerization. Cards that when you activate them, your opponent just simply cannot respond to them, period. Just point blank. There are some cards that only don't allow certain kinds of other cards to respond, like say Dark Ruler No More only restricts you from using monster effects to respond to it, but you can respond with spells and traps if you have it. So if you have like a Solemn Judgment, you can drop it down. But either way, I think those blanket ones like Super Polymerization are really just not great for the game. I understand that they're meant to be sort of board breakers. They're meant to sort of punish the opponent for going all in and not having follow-up resources. But at the same time, Yu-Gi-Oh is a game that's centered around interactions, and anything that really hurts that dynamic, I think it tends to be fairly aggravating, unfun, and antithetical to the game itself. I think in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh, most, if not everything, should be respondable in some type of way. But if you have a card like Super Poly and you use it and you're able to fusion summon off your opponent's monsters and things like that, the only way to really stop it is to play a Floodgate, and we'll talk about that later. Next up at number 3 is going to be missing timing. Now this one is in the middle of the pack here because it doesn't happen that much anymore in the modern day with how cards are worded, but it happened a lot more back in the day and still finds itself hanging out every once in a while in modern decks. Older cards were often worded in such a way that, because of game mechanics and because of the way that they were worded, would force them to not activate depending on when an activation would occur. Here's an example. Pete and the Dark Clown is an older school Yu-Gi-Oh card that had an effect where when it's sent to the graveyard, you can banish it and then you can summon another one from your hand or deck. Problem is it said when. So if you use a card like, say, Soul Taker, which can target a face-up monster your opponent controls and destroy it, and then your opponent gains 1,000 life points. Well, if your opponent used that on your Pete and the Dark Clown, they're going to destroy Peyton, and then you're going to gain 1,000 life points. Because the last thing that happened in that effect resolution was you gaining 1,000 life points, Pete and the Dark Clown is not going to activate because it has to activate the moment after a different thing happened, its condition happened. So if you have an effect that says when a card is destroyed, you can do a thing, and that card is destroyed, but then the next thing isn't that effect activating immediately, then it misses the timing altogether, and you just don't get to use that card's effect. You don't get to do the thing that that card was intended to do. You don't get to play that card with its full purpose and potential, and that's just really kind of ridiculous. There's some strategy, there's some reason behind some cards that have it. I think there was definitely, it's in the rules, like it's in the rules, you can see it's there. It's something that Konami's aware of, and like it's part of Yu-Gi-Oh now. But I do think that it's really unfortunate, and it really just makes certain cards not only worse, but sort of a ruling nightmare. They make things very confusing, especially to newer players who run into them. And it just generally makes you feel bad that if you're playing a card and you're like, this effect is really cool, but a lot of times I'm not going to be able to actually take advantage of it because of the way it's worded. And at the end of the day, Yu-Gi-Oh is all about using really cool monsters to pull off cool effects and stuff like that. So having stuff like this and missing timing just doesn't fit right. At number 2, and I know I'm going to get shit for this, but it's going to be Pendulum Summoning. Now, this is on the list as number 2, mostly because we know what the meme is. Pendulum Summoning is like the thing that new people who don't know a lot about Yu-Gi-Oh come into the game and say, whoa, what is going on here? Way too much card text, too complicated, I'm out. Right? And I think Konami knows that. I think people have realized that over the years. And even if you're a Pendulum fan, I think you have to admit it's probably on the lowest end, or if not the bottom, of the summoning conditions in Yu-Gi-Oh. Not in terms of like how good it is, although I guess that could be arguable, but more so, I guess Ritual would be the worst, but more so in the terms of what it stands for and what it did to the game. Nowadays, Pendulum Summoning is kind of in this realm where it's not seen as very good. It doesn't get a lot of support. Konami just throws them a bone every once in a while. Decks are kind of called pendulum piles now rather than having actual archetypes within them, even though there are some of those, but they're not like prevalent. It's kind of fallen off by the wayside, and that's a stark contrast to when they were first released and new support was coming out and they were trying to sell it, where they were absurdly powerful, absurdly complicated, and just went off the wall. Having a monster effect and a spell effect on the same card seems kind of cool in theory, but in practice, just the way that it all worked was just a bit too much. It wasn't super fun, at least in my opinion, and I think in a lot of people's opinions. And at the end of the day, I think Konami even realized that the way it was implemented wasn't exactly the best. I think there's a reality where Pendulum Summoning becomes one of the coolest mechanics in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! I just unfortunately, sorry Pendulum players, I don't think we're in that spot. I mean, literally the card that every single person who says Yu-Gi-Oh's cards have too many word text is this guy, Endymion, the Pendulum monster. Like, this is what people see in Yu-Gi-Oh if they don't play Yu-Gi-Oh. And again, we've talked about it in a bunch of other videos before. You've heard it in the community. Yu-Gi-Oh has a new player problem, and Pendulum's I won't say are the start of it, but they certainly helped cement that as part of the reason. And finally, the number one worst mechanic in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Floodgate effects. Now, this is a very wide sort of genre of effects that I'm talking about here, but any effect that essentially tells your opponent you're not allowed to engage with one of the mechanics in the game, I think is the worst. It's terrible. That's literally taking away game mechanics, especially if it's something as wide as you're not allowed to use monster effects. You're not allowed to special summon. You're not allowed to use spell effects. You're not allowed to use traps. Less so traps because nobody replaces those anymore. But spell effects, monster effects, special summoning, cards that do that grind a fast-paced game to a halt and feel terrible. At the end of the day, Floodgate effects are uninteractive. They are boring to play against, and I can't really imagine that they're that fun to play with, except for the, you know, masochistic feeling of like, oh, I got this boy, I got him, he can't play the game, haha, that's so fun for me. I don't get that, you know. I like when Yu-Gi-Oh at its peak is constant back and forths, constant, you have the momentum, now I have the momentum, and when you throw a Floodgate in there, it kind of just slams the brakes on the car, and you are now just sitting there staring at each other, looking at the wall, and you're just kind of waiting to either die or wait for time to happen, or maybe you'll draw your like one out to it. And that's the other part, is that you can say just like draw the out, bro, but at the end of the day, I don't think you can really justify having cards in a game, in a card game, especially one as fast-paced as Yu-Gi-Oh! As much as people might want Yu-Gi-Oh! To slow down, it is what it is. People are playing and enjoying Yu-Gi-Oh! As it is today because it is fast, because it is combo heavy, because it is highly interactive in the first two turns, and when you just slam the brakes on it with Floodgate effects, it really just throws everything off and like tries to create a brand new game within the game, and it just doesn't work for me, man. I hate it. I hate Floodgate effects. I hate Floodgates in Yu-Gi-Oh! Even monster Floodgates, I don't like them. They're not fun for me. I don't mind Omni Negates. I don't mind picking through your opponent's negates and having to play through it. I actually think that's fun. It's more like dealing with a puzzle. But Floodgates aren't puzzles. They're just an obstacle. It's just a mountain in your way that you have to either find a way to push through it or get defeated. And I don't think that's a healthy way for Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think Konami realizes that, because in the last ban list, they limited like a bunch of them. So I hope that's a trend in the right direction. And we'll see if Floodgates stick around forever or what happens with them. I imagine Floodgates will be here for a long time, but maybe Konami's turning over a new leaf and trying to reduce their impact on the game. We'll have to wait and see. Well, those weren't controversial at all, were they? Well, if they were, I'm sure you'll let me know down in the comments. And while you're there, go ahead and scroll up just a little bit from the angry comment that you're writing. Hit the subscribe button if you enjoyed watching this video. Hit the like button if you like this kind of content. And make sure that in the comments, after you write your angry comment about how I'm wrong about pendulum summoning, go ahead and drop your own top 5 worst Yu-Gi-Oh! Mechanics. And let me know if you think I should do a top 5 best Yu-Gi-Oh! Mechanics, because, fun fact, I like playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And I have a lot to talk about that Yu-Gi-Oh! Does correctly as well. So we'll see how that works out. If you guys want it, I'll make it. But in the meantime, see you guys on the next one. Peace.